So basically, then what I hear you asking is that if your mindfulness is limited, how should it be divided?
Yeah, I guess so. Or how am I portioning it out? Or am I thinking about it too narrowly?
All right. Um, most drivers, especially in the West, there's a variety of reasons behind it, but most drivers are not very alert. In fact, while they're sitting behind the wheel, they go on to automatic pilot. They get bored. They want to listen to music, all kinds of things, to where um, a really good driver, what you could almost call a professional, one who is going to make sure that his boss gets to his destination without any hassles. Okay. And these guys are mindful in the sense that what they're doing is watching the road. They're paying attention to what's going on. Now, oftentimes, these kind of drivers that you're talking about have already proven themselves by being race car drivers, which is where they develop the skills to pay attention. Because the race car drivers, if they're not paying attention, they get killed. And the crowd loves that kind of stuff. That's why they come to those races, is in case there's an engine that comes flying through the air right in my direction. But the point is that a long point, but the point is when you're driving the car, pay attention to what you're doing. That, in fact, is exactly the whole point of meditation, is to pay attention to what you're doing. I once asked Achan Bhikkhu Buddhadasa the question based in meditation. In fact, this was almost the turning point. And that was when I mentioned, well, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And he chuckled it. He laughed. And he said, no, if at first you don't succeed, look at what you're doing. And that look at what you're doing, in fact, is the entire teaching of the Dhamma. That's just another one of the shorthand ways, just like your last one of get happy, be happy. Another way of stating that is look at what you're doing, especially in the sense of looking at what you're feeling, looking at what you're thinking. But when driving a car, the safest way to drive a car is by watching the road and look at what you're doing, as opposed to having conversations with a friend or on the cell phone or eating a Big Mac or one of the people in the car or whatever you're doing. It's better to not do any of that and pay attention to the road. And mindfulness of breathing is one of the things that you can do that will help with that mindfulness of watching the road, of staying in your senses, to be here now. That's what makes a good driver. And that's why so many accidents happen, is because the world is filled with people who live their ordinary life while they're behind the wheel of a very big, dangerous automobile. And they ought to watch what they're doing and pay attention, but they don't. And so, in fact, in that regard, it's very simple. Now, excuse me for a second. Oh, good. That happened. In Thailand, they have a different set of rules for driving. And in that regard, here on this island especially, almost all of the victims of the accidents on the road that wind up at the hospital are foreigners. One of the things is that they're not really skilled at driving a motorbike anyway. They don't understand the issue of sand is everywhere. And sometimes it looks like that the street right in front of you is not sandy, but there's just enough sand there to make it almost like glass. The next point, though, is the important one. And the important one is that in Thailand, they do not have the normal way of driving mentality. And that normal way of driving mentality is what is called the right of way, or the rules of the road. And the most important ones, about when you're backing up and have an accident versus when you're going forward and getting hit by the side, and all of that kind of stuff is all laid down in the law. And that it goes under the premise of rules of the road in the sense of right of way. This is my lane. And because of that mentality, if someone is in your lane at the wrong time, you can have the thought, this is my lane. And that thought will last just long enough that now you're going to have an accident. That instead of reacting immediately, we will stop to have a thought, you should not be here. That's wrong for you to do that. And in fact, you can bring it back under that first level of doubt is, who made this mess? Well, if we're behind the wheel of an automobile making that split-second decision, it's their mess, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're more than likely going to be part of an accident. Isn't that amazing? This is why accidents happen, is because people live their lives not paying full attention to the road, with the understanding that you are 100% responsible, because they trust in the law, they trust in the rules, they trust in the almighty authority system. Right? In Thailand, no such deal. In Thailand, in fact, if you could express it, it would be share the road. It don't belong to you. And so this is a country that will commonly have 5 lanes of traffic on a 2-lane highway, 3 of them being motorbikes. And they'll come and go like this. And if you're not watching where you're going and what you're doing, then you're more than likely going to be the problem, that you're not learning how to go with the flow. Because we have that idea that we own the road, or this is my lane, or I'm doing the right thing, is also part of that same mentality. At least I'm doing the right thing. No, the right thing is that you got to watch where you're going, because there's lots of nuts out there. So that is anapanasati while driving. Now you can actually go ahead.
I was just gonna, it's just it's so different from, like, the way you teach anapanasati is just so different from the way it's so commonly taught. Like, I suppose I've never had the idea of it, like, being so open to looking around what's going. And I know you said once before, it's like the breath is just an anchor and nothing more. So are you sort of saying, like, so if I have some idea of what my breath is doing at the moment, that's sort of like, yeah, sweet.
It's the anchor to get you in the moment, okay? Taking a deep breath and being mindful of the breathing, for instance, another example of just what we're talking about. It's not nearly so dangerous, but on special occasions, it can get really dangerous. And that is when 2 people are having a conversation. And quite often, they're not listening to each other. Quite often, one person is just putting up with the other person speaking. They're waiting for their chance to butt in so that they can make their point. And that happens a lot on television, but it happens in regular life a lot more. to where people are not actually listening to one another. So when a part then a practice of anapanasati would be when you're engaged with another person is to really, really listen intently, having the intention, the strong determination that I'm going to be here now and I'm going to listen to what this person has to say.
Okay.
Because they'll hit you with something and then it's like they'll get you. But if you're worried about what you're going to say back to them, in other words, they're making 3 points, let's say. They may not even know how many points they're making, but they're making 1 point after another, and we'll latch on to 1 point. And while we're mulling over what to do about point 1, they're now talking about point 2, and I'm not quite listening, so that when they get to point 3, I don't know what they're talking about. And so I go back and start arguing point 1 again. And then conversations are like that all over the place because people are not listening to each other. They're worse listeners than they are drivers. I guess that's because the worst drivers have already killed themselves off. So, again, that's the be here now quality that we start up with mindfulness of breathing. That's the start of it. If we can become mindful of our breathing, that brings us to the body here in this moment, right here, right now. It's almost like a wake-up call to wake up, be here now, so that you can listen to someone, or you can follow a line in the sense that you know where you're speaking, not get lost, or driving a car, all kinds of activities like that. In fact, a lot of Zen is associated around the martial arts of Japan from the 13th century. So you'll have actually big schools of Zen and the art of archery. 2 of them that are left are actually mounted. Huh?
Kudo? Or Kido?
Yes, exactly. But if you look at what they're doing, it's all about getting the precise body movements down exactly for all of the things that need to be done for drawing the arrow, notching the arrow, drawing the bow, and immediately letting go without taking time to take aim. And you see in every movie, they'll watch you a whole lot of, I'm going to aim, I'm going to aim. Well, no, not with those big, heavy Japanese bows, especially since they don't do it with the fingers this way. They don't notch like that, which you use for power. They draw this way. And because they're drawing, there's not much force between the thumb and the index finger, and therefore you need to draw it back the full length. And in fact, most of the work is done with the left arm. That this part, the right arm, his job is to be able to hold that arrow just long enough to get it all the full weight, and he's let it go. They don't take aim. Why? Because the form and the paying close attention to what the body is doing right up to the launch of the arrow is what they is their skill. After the arrow is in the air, that now it's the arrow's job to find the target. And so that would be goal oriented. That's why it's such a profound point about Zen and the art of archery, is because they become unconcerned with whether the arrow reaches the target correctly or not. They're concerned with how beautifully they shot the arrow. Is that not true? Well, if you can learn to live your life like that, then that's that's noble. That would be a noble life, is to be mindful of each of our activities. For instance, driving a car, you're going to be a much better driver because you're watching where you're going.
So it's more like, so you sort of, you're saying it's more like a platform for investigation rather than like the target of the investigation?
Well, yes, it's also the part of stop being so goal-oriented and look at what you're doing right now. That's why what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa said to me was so profound, was because it's in fact the entire teaching of the Buddha. Look at what you're doing. Be here now is another way of saying it. Dukkha, dukkha nirodha means see that dukkha and avoid it. See that malfunction or that mistake or that bad feeling and step out of the way. If there is a pothole in the road, make sure that you know that pothole is there so that you can straddle it or move out of the way or whatever it takes so that you don't hit the pothole.
Okay, so I think something clicked a little bit, but I might need to.
What, the pothole?
No, it just when you were saying along the
wow,
lines.
what struggle you're in.
No, I'm just trying to get this right, but it's.
Never mind.
So like,
if you get it wrong, at least you got a little bit more right than you were last time. Don't try to get it perfect. You can't. The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao.
So like if you're taking something where a traditional, or not a traditional really, but just like a bog standard mindfulness type thing where it's like you're just watching the breath for as long as you can really. It's not actually emphasizing the investigative quality of it.
Never said as long as you can.
No, hold on.
You talk about it in the sense of sustaining it because it's satisfying.
No, I'm not saying that you said that. I'm saying like a lot of
okay.
a lot of people have this idea, or and this is like what's commonly taught or how I interpret it. It's like they're trying to be like, you fill up, like, let's say you sit down for 30 minutes, and in 30 minutes, if you fill those 30 minutes with just like feelings of breath at the nostril, you get awakened or whatever. But it's like sort of just, you're just mashing all of that into your, filling that time up. Whereas it's not actually investigating what's going on, because like the image you gave me or seemed quite active, like you're looking at what's happening as you do this practice. Like you're looking at, if you have this goal orientation, how it feels when you fail that goal, or if you have, or if you feel a bad feeling, then you feel like getting up or whatever. It's like you're trying to notice the cause and effect relationship within the practice, and then the breath is just helping you do that.
Actually, no. Let me start out with this. One of the things that I found quite amusing about Goenka's new building system there at Dhammarato was that he had little cells or little rooms set up, and that it reminded me of the practice rooms that are in the building at the United States Naval. At that time, it was the Naval School of Music. And they had practice rooms. All right, here's the point. When a student goes into the practice room, he can do many things. For instance, if he's playing the piano, he can put his elbows on the piano. He can go to sleep on the piano. The whole point about those practice rooms is they're as soundproof as possible. But the same thing can happen when the meditator goes into the meditation cell and closes that door. He's in that cell all by himself, and he can do whatever that he pleases. And that's generally what happens, except that many of them, dedicated as they are to practicing correctly, are actually practicing wrongly because they're wanting too much. That they're not actually just in there being able to sit down and enjoy the moment. Now, here's the real point. The real point of all of these steps of Anapanasati is each one of them, the verb is the verb to train. In other words, it's a skill to be developed. Sati is a skill to be developed. And then that investigative skill, that looking at what you're doing, that's watching, that can be put under the rubric also of mindfulness. Sometimes they can use the word awareness, but direct observation, just like driving the car. If you're driving the car mindfully, that means that you're watching the road, you're watching for the potholes, you're watching for traffic, you're watching for everything. And so if you can see it well ahead of you, then you can take the appropriate action. And so driving the car is very much like walking the old farmer going through the cow pasture, but his job is not just to reach the other end. His job is to watch where the cow pies are so he don't step in one of them. And most people don't recognize the danger of automobiles until until they're really not mindful and cause an accident. And then they recognize that they should be watching where they're going. And so that whole point, if you can take that and bring it then to your whole life, that watching where you're going not all the time, but whenever you remember to, and you're intentionally training to remember, then it's going to be more and more frequent.
Okay.
That it's a training. Okay, so if that, going back to that cell, if that piano player is in fact in that cell practicing the piano, then he's more than likely going to get the benefit out of the practice that he's putting in than someone who is sleeping on the piano or banging it with their elbows or taking an axe to it.
Or say someone starting a meditation practice with the goal of getting to like jhana 5 or whatever.
Exactly. That's another one. And that is the piano student in that practice room is actually trying to play music that he's not ready for. And he's not practicing the assignments that were given to him by the teacher. He's practicing stuff that he wants to do. All right. And that's often what happens with meditators is that they're out trying to experiment with doing a lot of stuff rather than following this very simple program of get happy, stay happy. It's a very simple thing to do. But we want too much out of it, and that we don't recognize that that getting happy is something that we're not used to doing. It's something we need to practice at. Takes actually, in some respects, it takes both skill and courage. Because almost all of the people that you'll meet in Perth are victims. They live their life as a victim, and basically what that means is they've got marching orders that they picked up from society, all the rights, rules, rituals, laws, ways of doing things in society in general, and then they start yakking at themselves, you do this, you do that, you go on a diet, and meanwhile the child inside, the id, or the child ego state, is saying, no, I don't want to. But then the child is afraid because if he doesn't do what he's told to do, that he'll get punished or he'll get left out. And so we go along to get along. This is what the Buddha would call an animal state. We become animals in the sense that we're doing what we're told to do because we're not smart enough to break out of the stupidity that we found ourselves in. So the waking up process is to wake up out of that slavery that we self-impose, that we throw off the slavery, we throw out that superego state, which Byrne refers to as the parent ego state, because we get most of our laws, rules, rights, rituals, ways of living, things that are right to do, etc., like that. We get it from family. And we spend the rest of our lives rebelling against all of the rules we picked up, making ourselves miserable instead of picking up a more. Now, what's that more appropriate set of rules? Well, I just gave it to you. It's what we've been talking about. Look at what you're doing. That should be your new rule. Only need one. And in that sense, look at what you're doing means watch for dukkha. That's the first noble truth. That's what we should be mindful of, is to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for suffering. And these are skills to be developed. Joy is a skill to be developed. Happiness is a skill to be developed. Mindfully breathing quite often is a skill to be developed.
Okay.
And becoming that winner, becoming that lion, becoming the emperor of your own pile of dirt and getting up on top of it is a training, a skill to be developed.
Okay.
So that we feel successful. That in fact, that whole quality of success is very important in the teachings of the Buddha, but it's not well emphasized. One of the words of it is the word shraddha, which is actually wrongly translated as faith. Well, if the faith is on the outside, then it's worthless. Faith without works is dead, so they say. If that's true, then the works are everything, and the faith was already dead. They say, oh, no, you can't do it that way because you wouldn't get any work if you didn't have any faith. And now we've got bingo. So let's look at that word shraddha, because the word shraddha is actually not faith. It's actually confidence. And that confidence is built upon success, which is a skill to be developed. So all in all, then, shraddha is a skill to be developed. And when you're developing it well, you become very eager for the Dhamma, that you're curious about the Dhamma, you're on guard for dukkha, and you wind up having a joyful life because you're dedicating yourself to the right way to live. But you have to remember to keep practicing this, and that's why the number one skill to be developed is sati, is to remember. The number two skill is right effort. Because it's very common for students to wake up sitting at meditation their first day of the first retreat, and they recognize, oh, the mind has wandered away. But then their next thought is not, never mind, start again. Their next thought is not take a deep breath and boogie on down the path. Their next thought is, oh, poor me. I thought the mind could do this. Or another one was, oh, maybe meditation is not for me after all. Or maybe this teacher didn't give me the right instructions. I'll have to go check again to see if I'm practicing right. And you know that the mind can just come up with all kinds of garbage, even though mindfulness came. But now they just go right back into the garbage, only the new topic of the garbage is why I can't meditate. But if we take the right effort, that right effort is actually gladdening the mind, which is basically boiling down to the point of, I can do this. I can remember, no matter how obstructed the mind gets. I can bring it back. So even if you're out driving the car and then you all of a sudden Sati comes and he says, well, and in fact, it might come with a close call. And then you say, wait a minute, I'm going to be more mindful. I'm not going to have these close calls anymore. And then you start being more mindful. So that whole then point is that we bring Anapanasati as a practice into our whole lives as best we can. And that best we can is Sati, developing that skill of Sati and developing the skill of right attitude, which is the attitude that Shraddha brings when we know that we can do this. And you know you can do this, Ashley. You know you can do it because you've been practicing it before. And you recognize that now you can get yourself out of crap anytime that you can remember that, hey, I can come out of this crap I'm in.
Yeah, I guess I've just been a bit just being a bit down on myself about it. There's something
Well,
I did
that's
want
your
to
old habit. I don't expect you to do anything else except remember that you don't have to do that.
There was something I wanted to ask about because it's like I feel like I sort of caught this negative, like a Vedana, like nasty bit of Vedana creating the birth of a thought or whatever. But it wasn't like a strictly linear thing. So like I had this, I remember it fairly well. It was like a pain in my leg or something, and I remember like catching like, oh yeah, there's the pain, and then sort of like just scanned around the room for whatever reason, and I remember something like after I had scanned, I sort of came into a thought, and I just was wondering, is this like, I don't know, does it have to be like, this one instance of a leg pain or whatever goes, and then it's sort of like just keep going, but you might not notice that process is going on. So like I could have this negative, like a pain in my leg, go off, and then I go off into think about something else, or listening to music or whatever, just for an example. And that same negative feeling from the pain brings up, like creates that thought, even if there was like an interruption between that. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, but the word pain is a concept.
Right.
So there's a distinction between what the body actually, the sensation of the body, and our reaction to it of liking and not liking.
Right.
And once we recognize that we don't like that sensation, we can figure out something to do about it that's wholesome. For instance, if this is meditation and you're sitting in pain in meditation, move around to get your body moving. So to eliminate the pain, there's no reason to make yourself pained unless you've got a particular purpose at it. But basically, doing those kinds of sittings is very close to self-flagellation. Now, there is some value in it, but I wouldn't call it noble. But you can learn to, let us say, deal with bodily sensations in a very strong way. An example of someone who, let us say, has a point to make to prove that he can escape from a straitjacket. They don't use straitjackets anymore, but in the 1950s, half the movies had a straitjacket in it or two. And so the question is how to escape from a straitjacket. The answer is you have to dislocate your shoulder. And by dislocating the shoulder, then you can somehow grab that thing while your shoulder is being dislocated and pull that part of the straitjacket off. And so people can learn to do that. There are Indians, in fact, possibly the best one is the guy who can take the great big fish hooks, for the really, really big marlin and whatnot, and put one under his rib and pull it back up. And then he hoists himself up with a tree. And while he's dangling there by that hook attached to his rib, he's jumping up and down with joy. All right. I'm not asking you to have that kind of control over your bodily sensations, but it proves that it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
That we do not have to see body sensations as pain. We might see it as something that needs to be taken care of, as if it was giving a message, something like a baby crying. But that's another good example, is when a baby cries, many times, especially young mothers, will feel bad. Rather than cuddling and cuckooing with the child and making the child all happy, the mom gets unhappy, and now the baby's unhappy, and both of them are happy, and they just... Or when the child gets older, the child has a tantrum, and when the child has a tantrum, mom has her own tantrum, threatens the child to shut up or I'll beat you, and now the child is both having a tantrum, I want it, I want it, I want it, and now I'm scared to death of mommy. That's not the best way to have a tantrum. The best way to have a tantrum is that when I'm having a tantrum, people are laughing at me for having a tantrum. Now, that's the best way to have a tantrum. So this interaction that we're talking about here shows how we learn this stuff as children, and then it becomes part of the ordinary programming that we wind up with adults, so that even though the young man rebelled against his father, he winds up at the age of 40 realizing that he's just like his dad. The very thing at his early adulthood he was rebelling from, that's him now.
I had that realization not too long ago, but I just looked at my parents and I thought you guys were gargoyles when I was a teenager, and it's like, oh, I'm just like you. Like, and it's just like, wow, it's incredibly it's a bit silly looking back.
Okay. But the difference is that now that you can see them in that regard, you can recognize that, in fact, it's actually not a bad idea to see those emotional states that you individually get into as gargoyle territory. To not be reborn as a gargoyle. Not be reborn in the world, in the animal world, or in the world of pretas, or in the hell worlds. I guess gargoyles would be creatures from hell, though most of them are really high up on the top of the side of the temples and the Catholic churches. But here's the point: is that, and not only that, but I think the gargoyles are animals anyway, so they're beginning to be all four of the of the possibilities. But in all cases, these are woeful states. Whether there's anger, or whether there is anxiety, or whether there is fear, or whether there is going along to get along, or whether there is this desire for things, wanting things that we don't have. Because that's the favorite one of meditators. Why would any of these young guys get even interested in meditation? Why? Because they want a whole bunch of stuff, and they figure that's the shortcut, that's the easy way to get what I want. Well, the answer to that is yes, but it really is a whole lot easier than you think. And that is just to be happy, be satisfied, be that which you want to be, and do it right now. And when you forget, never mind, do it again. And when you forget again, never mind, remember to do it again and be that which you want to be. Be your very best whenever you remember to. Feel the very best feelings. That's up to you. The choice is yours. That's what this whole practice is all about.
Okay. Thanks for the talk.
Do you have anything to say?
Not particularly. No, not really.
Okay, skills to be developed. That's the word. Using the breath is always get enough oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Let that frontal cortex get the air, get the oxygen that it needs, so that you can be mindful, so that you can then feel like the champion that you actually are inside, and somehow still want to be.
Thank you, Dhammarato.
We'll see you later. See you soon.
See ya.